Right, we should be live now.
Okay, so good evening everyone. This is the first meeting of the Charnwood Borough Council Waste Management Scrutiny Panel. And before we start the meeting, I have an announcement to make. This virtual meeting is being live streamed. It will also be recorded and the recording subsequently made available via the Council's website. In addition, under the Openness of Local Government Bodies Regulations 2014, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or recordings is not under the Council's control. Please note that members of the public viewing the meeting via the live stream can only see the person who is speaking. Also that it takes a second or two for Zoom to switch view to that person once they begin. So participants should please ensure that their microphone is muted when they're not speaking. I'd like to ask each member of the panel to confirm verbally that they're present and that they can see and hear the proceedings. So can I ask Councillor Baldwin first, please?
Thanks, Chair. I can hear and see the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest?
Chair, I confirm that I can both see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Howe?
I can confirm I can both see and hear the meeting, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Needham?
I think Councillor Needham hasn't joined us yet, Chair. Hope you
Okay. And Councillor Parton?
All satisfactory here, seeing and hearing.
Thank you. Next, can I ask each officer to confirm verbally that they're present and that they can see and hear the proceedings. Matt Bradford, Head of Open Spaces and Cleansing.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Okay. Is Councillor Harper Davies, the Cabinet Lead Member, here?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Good evening. Thank you. And Ed Brown, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
And Laura Strong, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. In that case, can we move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. From what I understand, we haven't received any apologies for this evening. Councillor Needham may be arriving late. Item 2 is disclosures of pecuniary and personal interests. Do any members have any to declare? I can't see anybody indicating that they do. Item 3 is declarations of the party whip. Do any members have any to declare? No? Okay. Then item 4 is questions under Scrutiny Committee Procedure 11.16 and no questions have been submitted. So moving on to item 5, that is our scrutiny scoping document. So in the agenda pack that you all received, you should have received a copy of the scrutiny scoping document that we've prepared. Does anybody on the panel have any questions about this document? No?
Councillor Baldwin just raised his hand, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Baldwin?
I have some suggestions to make. I don't know whether you want to take suggestions or...
Okay.
All right. I suggest that we include an appendix to this that sets out exactly what we're going to look at. And my starter for 10 would be recycling centres. I had a look at the map on the Borough Council site, and I noted that there's only one recycling centre south of Forest Road, which seems completely out of kilter with the amount of building that's been going on in Shelthorpe. So I think we need to look at recycling centres and whether they're all in the right position or whether we can put some more in. And I suggest we do the same with litter bins as well. Another area that we might want to look at is the waste management fleet, or whether the waste management fleet that we just purchased actually fits in with the latest government guidelines that have been going to be set out later on in the presentations. And
Okay.
the third suggestion might be the Biffa incinerator, and I know that's privately owned, but they may actually have a suggestion about what we should be looking at, or whether they could use some of our waste. I don't know whether that's possible, but I think it's a question that we may want to ask, as they're going to be incinerating waste to produce electricity. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Baldwin. A couple of other hands have gone up. I'm not sure who was first, but can I take Matt Bradford and then I'll come to you, Councillor Parton.
Sorry, I was on mute there for a second. Just to come back on some of those suggestions that Councillor Baldwin has made. We don't have any bring sites within the borough anymore. So we did used to have glass and paper banks in various car parks and locations throughout the borough. They were removed a few years ago. Not sure where Councillor Baldwin got his references from for the locations of those, but it may be that there's a link to an old web page there somewhere that we need to take down. The reason for that was that all of the materials collected at the bring sites are collected as part of the household waste collection. We felt that we were duplicating our resources in collecting them, and they were being used as a backdoor for commercial waste to be disposed of through the household waste stream as well. So that's that. The disposal of residual waste is the responsibility of the county council as the waste disposal authority. So whether our recycling residual waste, our garden waste, where it gets treated and disposed of and how it gets treated and disposed of is a decision for the county council. So I would respectfully suggest that that's probably outside of the scope of what we want to consider, but I'm happy for members of the panel to decide otherwise on that one. The fleet question is a good question, and we can look at that as part of the environment bill and how that's how our services could be affected going forwards. But if we wanted to do a specific piece of work on that, then we could do.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I think we did speak about discussing the future of the fleet, didn't we, as part of this? Okay, Councillor Parton.
I wanted to check that what Councillor Baldwin was saying was relating to what Matt just described as a bring site, or does he actually mean the household recycling sites, like for example at Loughborough or Shepshed at Mount Sorrel? That's the first question. To answer the point regarding something that's within the remit of the county council, it does say in the document, your scoping document, the beginning of the top of page 4, it says areas of waste management that Charlborough Council are not responsible for. However, this will not preclude the panel making representations to other bodies. So there is the scope to do that, and whether you as chair want to speak to anybody from the county council regarding that during the life of this panel is something obviously your decision, but there are people who you would be able to speak to.
Thank you, Councillor Parton. Yes, it does say that in the scoping document, and if this panel does come up with any suggestions that they would like to put forward to the county council, then I think that is possible. I think Matt Bradford was just explaining that we don't have the power to make those decisions ourselves. Councillor Baldwin has his hand up again. I suspect he wants to respond to your point.
I mean, Councillor Barton was absolutely right. It's what I meant. On the second point about the county's recycling centres, I think it's important that we liaise with the county council so that we ensure that we dovetail and that we can help them improve their recycling waste, and they might be able to help us improve ours. So a bit of conversation there might not go amiss.
Thank you, Councillor Baldwin. Matt, is that something that happens anyway, or?
Yes, we talk very regularly to the county council. Obviously, we have split responsibilities, but in order for the whole waste management process to work, we have to coordinate that at an operational level. We're also at the moment producing a joint waste strategy with the 7 districts and boroughs in Leicestershire and the county council that looks at how all partners work together to improve waste management and recycling across the county. That will be out for consultation in the new year. So we work very closely with the county council.
Yeah, and I know that you've proposed that in one of our later meetings, we actually look at that strategy and scrutinise it to see if we have any recommendations to make or any suggestions that we can put forward. Okay, so is the panel happy to note the scoping document? Does anybody have any further comments to make? No, so can we confirm that the panel notes that document and move on to the next item then? So item 6 is the waste and recycling data and comparison presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Matt so that he can take us through that PowerPoint.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay. And I'll invite any questions at the end of each slide before I move on. Okay, can everybody see the slides there? So what I've done primarily for this evening is just compare our performance across Leicestershire and talk about how we perform across the county and in line with government targets. And the first slide that you see is the one that is the performance indicator that everybody talks about. So it's the percentage of household waste sent for recycling, composting and reuse. So
I apologise to interrupt, but all I can see is the first slide, and I can see the rest of the PowerPoint to the left. I'm sorry.
So can you see that, Ted, at all? Or
we can see the first slide, Matt, but not the second one.
It's not on full screen. It's not on full screen yet.
Right, I'll unshare. And I'll try that. I'll try that again.
That's it.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So this first slide, as I said, it's the slide that everybody talks about, and when we talk about the 50% recycling rate that we aspire to, and was a target in the Waste Framework Directive set by the EU. This is the target that we talk about, and it's the one that's reported through our business plan quite regularly, and one we get scrutinised on. So our performance is shown on the blue line. It might be quite hard to see on the screen, but I did send the charts in advance here. So all of the counties in Leicestershire currently perform at between 46.9 and 42.5%. And we are, I think we're one off the bottom of those authorities there, with the highest performing authority being Charnwood. So it's showing our recycling rate at just under 43% at the moment. You'll see in the chart that there has been a decline over time. That's quite consistent with what happens nationally. Recyclable materials are being lightweighted for transportation reasons and for recycling reasons. So the example that I always give for that is people used to buy coffee in a jar, and now you perhaps buy it in a refillable pouch instead. That obviously takes material out of the recycling waste stream, and also newspaper circulation is down, which impacts on this indicator. And there are a few other factors in there as well. So we are all performing at under the 50%, which was the old target. The new waste and recycling strategy in the Environment Bill will set a target of 65% for recycling by 2035. So you'll see that we've got quite a lot of way to go to hit that. Most of us got 20% to go to hit that number. So you'll see that some authorities have performed near that level in the past. If you look at the line, the orange and yellow line for Harbour, they were up to about 62% at one point. At the time that performance was achieved, they had a food waste collection, weekly food waste collection, and they did free garden waste. And as those services changed to no food waste and a chargeable garden waste service, you see how that has dropped off and curtailed towards the end of the period there. So I did look for the highest performers in this area. So for 2019-20, the highest performer in the country was Three Rivers, local authority in Hertfordshire, and they got 64.1% last year. The lowest performers were Barrow in Furness. In Cumbria, they had 18.8% this performance indicator. So you see there's a wide range of performance there for this particular indicator. Probably like to invite any questions at this point from the panel before we move on to the next slide.
Matt, can I ask something? And then Councillor Parton has his hand up. I was just wondering, there is evidently a downward trend, but it seems like Charnwood took a tumble that they never really recovered from in 2016-17. Do you have any idea what the sort of predominant factors behind that were?
I don't really. I think we need to, there are changes in regulations all the time. And there was a change in how we had to categorise some of our street sweepings that we collected. So if you, street sweepings used to be able to, if they were recycled, be included in your figures, and there was a change to how that was categorised. I think that may well have played into that, but no, I haven't really looked in any detail. Obviously, we have increased the garden waste charges over time. I don't think we can ignore that fact, but our subscriber numbers have stayed pretty consistent, and in fact they've increased over that period. So I wouldn't suggest it was down to that in particular. So I don't know. I think Councillor Ward, what we'll go on to look at is the tonnages for that particular period as well, and that might show whether it was recycling or garden waste that took a particular hit between those 2 years.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parton.
The target figure, which is consistently set at 50%, that does seem rather arbitrary. Has that number been arrived at, or seemingly it's halfway between 0 and 100, that will do? Because whilst until about 2012, some authorities were able quite comfortably to beat it. Now, virtually every authority isn't getting particularly close. So the 50% doesn't seem to change. What's the reasoning behind that figure that seems so arbitrary? It's almost been plucked as just it's halfway between 0 and 100. Yeah,
if I could respond to that one, Chair, that 50% target was set by the Waste Framework Directive 2009. It was set by the EU, and I'm not clear how they arrived at the target, but that was the target that we were obliged to aim for under that directive. The target proposed in the Environment Bill is 65%. That the Environment Bill hasn't been passed yet, but I expect that target will be implemented, and we'll be obliged to aim for 65% by 2035. So again, not sure how that figure's derived, or whether there's any meaning behind it, or whether it's just something to aim at, and a good number for local authorities to hit.
They are looking at different ways of assessing the recycling that's collected now, aren't they, as part of the Environment Bill? I think I read earlier that they were looking at not just calculating it on tonnage, because it sort of disadvantages authorities that collect lower amounts of garden waste, for example.
Yes, yeah, I think that there is a performance sort of review on the data that we will report, and it can be quite difficult. Garden waste does vary quite significantly from one district to another, depending on the housing mix that you have in that particular area. So you find that leafy rural areas perform quite well in their garden waste tonnages, where very small urban areas don't collect the same amount of tonnage, and that's only to be expected. But we're all aiming for the same target, so it does seem quite. It doesn't seem equitable, really.
Okay, Councillor Needham.
I had a question about, do we know what happened in 2011-12, where it seems, I think, almost all the local authorities peaked in the amount that they collected? So was there a particular reason for that? Was it sort of like new collections coming in, perhaps, or a change to the way we collect recycling? Because I don't remember when, but it used to be, glass in the boxes, didn't it? And then we went into the mixed green bin. So I'm just wondering what happened in that year where everybody seemed to perform much better than the other years.
Again, I'm not quite sure on that, Councillor Needham. It could be that it was a particularly dry summer and the garden waste tonnages were quite low, because the garden waste does have a big impact on this, and I think when we separate them out on future slides, you'll see that. But a lot of the content of the garden waste bin is water, and it can depend on how wet the summer's been and the water content of the grass as to how your performance is viewed. So it could be, if we have a particularly dry summer and the grass is very dry, people know it, the garden waste arisings go down quite significantly. and that can have a big impact on the performance that reported. And I would suggest it's probably something to do with that rather than anything else.
So really, these fluctuations are likely to be things that we haven't really had any control over.
In certain circumstances, there are some things that are outside of our control, and as I say, garden waste it is quite variable because of a number of factors. Again, housing mix can make one district look good and another district look bad. And if you compare a year-on-year performance, if you have a particularly dry summer compared to a wet summer, that the garden waste arisings will be substantially lower than they will be. So when you've got lush green grass with a high water content, then your garden waste tonnages go up significantly, and your recycling performance looks a whole lot better.
Okay. Councillor Howe, you had your hand up earlier. Do you have a question?
No, thank you. I'll put it down. I'll wait till the end. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Okay. If there are no more questions, shall I move on to the next slide? Just to finish off this one, sorry, one thing I meant to say earlier. Our ranking for this performance indicator nationally in England is 163rd out of 341 authorities. So this chart looks at the percentage of household waste that's sent for recycling. So it takes the garden waste out of the equation, and that's a lot where the variability comes in. And you'll see that we perform quite well on this indicator, generally first or second throughout the county. We are just under 26% on the latest figures there for this particular indicator. So this is something that we can influence, and it doesn't have the external factors involved as much like the garden waste does. And when compared with others, as I say, we work quite well. Interesting to see on this graph, I think, that we do have an outlier in that the bottom line that you can see on this chart is North West Leicestershire District Council, and their percentage for recycling is probably significantly lower than the other 6 authorities. And my assumption on that, and it is an assumption, is that they're the only authority that collect their recycling differently from the other 6. So the top 6 have a commingled recycling system, one bin, all of the recycling in that bin together. And North West Leicestershire have a source separated system where the resident has multiple bins or bags and is required to sort the waste before presenting it in their containers at the curbside. So again,
Matt, isn't that what's being proposed?
yes.
It's a bit worrying, isn't it?
It is, and we'll come on to that at the environment bill presentation. But the government is quite keen for us to separate the waste more than we do at the moment. There are reasons for that, but I believe that you get a lower participation rate amongst residents, and the yields are lower. So, and that is borne out by this particular slide. Okay, if there's any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next one.
Can't see any hands up, Matt.
Okay, so this is the composting percentage for each borough, and you will see that this is over fewer years than the other graph, unfortunately. that you'll see there's been a gradual sort of decline in our composting rate from 2016 to 17, and that we are in recent years have been less in terms of the percentage that we collect for composting when comparing that to our overall waste collection. Again, you'll see Northwest Leicestershire is a bit of an outlier on this one for another reason, really. They're the top line on this graph, and they are the only authority that has a free garden waste collection in the county. And any questions on that one? Councillor Needham?
Thanks, Matt. I'm guessing I already probably know the answer to this, but I thought I'd just check. Is there any way of knowing whether the change there is because more people are home composting or not?
Probably not.
Right.
To be honest,
I mean, I don't know how we would know that, but
yeah, we can take some proxy data and look at the number of garden waste subscribers over time, and we've got the tonnage over time. It's hard to know how many people are home composting and how many aren't, because that waste doesn't enter our collection system. Okay, this is slightly different graph. This one we've been talking about percentages on the last slide. This one is actual tonnages. So this is based on the amount of waste that we collect, and as you'd expect, Charnwood being the biggest district within Leicestershire, we collect the most. Waste. So what's quite stark on this one is the uptick for all authorities between 1920 and 2021, and that's around 10%. It's the increase in waste collected due to COVID. So home working, people spending more time at home, they would dispose of their, say someone working in an office would dispose of their lunchtime sort of wrappings and packaging through their workplace. That's now come into the workplace. So we have seen quite a significant upturn in residual waste arising from one year to the next, and that is COVID related. So that last figure there for 2021, I think, was 38,000 tonnes of residual waste, compared to 34,000 the year before. Okay, this is another residual waste one. It's probably more useful than the last one. It looks at the residual waste in kilograms per household. This tells us how much on average each household is thrown away. And we are the second lowest authority on this particular chart. Levy or OB at the bottom, but we are the second lowest on this chart. So on average, our residents produce more residual waste than the other authorities in Leicestershire. But again, you'll see that sharp uptick at the end to show that those kilograms per household have gone up in the last 12 months. Any questions on that one?
Don't think so, Matt.
No. Okay. So again, this chart shows the overall tonnage for the amount of recycling that we've collected. So we do again perform quite well on this one. We collect more recycling than anybody else. That's to be expected, again, being the being the biggest borough, but that equates to about 26,000 tonnes on a normal year, slightly higher last year due to COVID. This is an overall waste collected per head of population within the county, split down by borough. And again, you'll see here that we are the second lowest. This is quite useful to see how much each household is disposing of as an overall, combined figure. Again, you'll see that that's gone up in the last 12 months due to COVID there. Okay, any questions on those charts as a package, or on any of those last ones that anyone would like to ask?
Well, it's a point really rather than a question. Some of that information is quite encouraging in a way. The fact that despite collecting the most waste overall of the borough councils in the area per household, we've got some of the lowest collection rates is quite encouraging, but it does leave us with a bit of a dilemma, because we've then got to find a way of reaching that 65% target when our collection rates are already pretty good, but not in the right areas, which I guess is why we're all here.
I think that's a fair assessment, Councillor Ward. I think what I would say, as the head of service, I think our recycling performance is reasonably good. Our garden waste tonnages are probably lower than some authorities, and that on average across the county, our residents produce less waste than others, which is quite encouraging as well. So whilst we do focus on that percentage of household waste sent for recycling and composting, the first slide that we looked at, and getting to that target of 50%, I think there are some encouraging signs, although you do need to scratch beneath the surface to find them a little bit.
Okay, does anybody else on the panel have any questions? I don't think so. So Matt, if you want to move on to your next presentation, which is item 7 and is an overview of the Environment Bill.
Okay, can everybody see the slides? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Not yet. They're just on the, like they were before. They're not on the full screen at the moment.
Okay.
It's like the index at the beginning of the presentation rather than the.
Right. Let me stop and share again, like I did last time.
Yeah, that's it.
That's
the full
better,
screen
Matt.
now. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm used to using Teams rather than Zoom, I think, and it confuses me. I've got different ways of doing things, so apologies for that. I'm going to talk about the Environment Bill in this presentation. I have to answer any questions that you've got. Again, Chair, if I can, I'll probably pause for questions at the end of each segment that's probably got some significant impact for us, because there is quite a lot to take in here. And I did ask members of the panel to do some background reading that relates to this particular presentation. So if I haven't covered anything in the presentation that you would like to ask from your background reading, please ask, and we'll answer any questions that you may have. So the Environment Bill is going through its final reading in the House of Commons before it receives royal assent. And that will basically set the direction for quite a lot of environmental matters for the foreseeable future. And within that, there are quite a lot of elements that relate to waste and recycling. They were derived from the Waste and Resources Strategy for England that was published before the Environment Bill, that set the agenda for waste and recycling collections going forward. Now, this is quite fundamental. It's probably a once in a generation change to the way that local authorities collect waste. And there are some big impacts, both in performance and in cost. So all of this could have a significant impact for Charnwood Borough Council. So it's just an introduction to the bill, really. It makes targets, plans and policies for improving the natural environment. Statements and reports about environmental protection for the Office of the Environment, Environmental Protection, about waste and resource efficiency, air quality, for the recall of products that fail to meet environmental standards, about water, nature, biodiversity for conservation covenants, and about the regulation of chemicals and for connected purposes. So that's the government explanation of what the Environment Bill is. And the Waste and Resources Strategy for England is the strategy that sets out how we'll preserve material resources by minimising waste, promoting resource efficiency and moving towards a circular economy in England. So we'll talk about the circular economy quite a lot. That is that's the model that the government is working towards in its resource management. It's an international resource management model. So this is the circular economy. Can I just ask, can you see my pointer on the screen if I move my cursor?
Yes, we can, Matt.
Yeah. So the circular economy is shown in this diagram, where we get raw materials and recycled and recovered materials coming into being, if you like, making things, packaging products. And then you get consumption and use by members of the public or industry. That resource is recovered and we manage that resource. And then that material goes back in to be recycled and recovered again. And the better we are at this cycle, the less raw materials come in at the top. And I think this is important, because really what we've got is, with waste and the waste management industry, it's an issue of overconsumption, really. And we're consuming the planet's resources at an alarming rate. So the raw materials used in the 10 years leading up to 2010, across the world, 50 billion tonnes of raw materials was used in that period. That doubled between 2010 and 2017 to 100 billion tonnes of raw materials. So really, we have to minimise the amount of raw materials that are used, that are coming into this economy, and improve the amount, decrease the amount of resource that comes from the planet, whatever that be, plastic or any other material, and improve both our rates of consumption and our rates of recycling, really. And I think that's what the strategy sets out to do. So I might invite some questions there at Councillor Ward, if anyone has any.
Thank you, Matt. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
Let me, where are we?
Councillor Howe.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was trying to raise my hand and didn't. I think because I was on the previous, subcommittee when we looked at this, and one of the difficulties we're going to have is, I think Matt agree with me, we're halfway through the process. The government's got the hand on the tap and can control the flow and decide, make some packaging illegal, make more packaging user-friendly that we recycle. We're in the middle, and then Leicestershire County Council's collecting the byproduct off of us. So, as I say, it does make it make it difficult to come to firm views. But that is the problem. We can't say we think these items shouldn't be sold or whatever, or packaging. We're in the middle, and that's how we have to operate. Thank you.
Matt, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I think, Councillor Ward, thanks. I think there are some things that we can influence and some things we can't. And the things that we can influence, we've got to try and influence them to make sure that the council is playing its part, and that the residents of Charnwood have the opportunity to manage their waste in a responsible way that looks after the materials. And the other factor that we don't talk about here is that our carbon management reduces. So the production of these raw materials is quite carbon intensive. So the more we can do, the more we can reuse the materials. We can have a big impact on both the amount of materials that we use and on the carbon the carbon footprint for the borough as a whole. So I think there are things we can influence, but there are things that we can't. I think we've just got to accept our position in waste management and do what we can.
Yeah, we are a little bit in the middle as a waste collection authority, and I know there's an issue with recycling credits as well, and where they go or don't go. But I think as part of the Environment Bill, the government will be stipulating, what's it called, extended producer responsibility. So companies producing products will have a responsibility to either use recyclable materials or pay authorities like us towards the collection and recycling and disposal of those packaging items. And I think they're going to introduce some deposit return schemes as well. So the government will be making some of this legislation, which will help. So yeah, we are a little bit in the middle, but there are things happening that should improve our situation. Councillor Parton, you have your hand up.
In terms of what I was doing in the research was attempting to understand how much of a particular package, so example could be a tin for tin food like baked beans or tomatoes, or plastic bottles that contain things like olive oil or some sort of condiment. And I came across this report that was written in 2015 regarding using recycled content. So the question is surely, depending on how much carbon targets are put on private companies, food manufacturers, then they will be incentivized obviously to use more recyclable material. And then that, I suppose the next point is on an average piece of packaging, how much is recycled? And I got some figure of 53%. I thought, God, that seems a bit high.
Yeah, the big difficulty, Councillor Parton, is at the minute you have what's called composite materials. So, and they're very difficult to recycle because they're made of different components glued and compressed together that can't be separated in the recycling process. So the most difficult one quoted is the Pringles tube. That all of the materials that go into make a Pringles tube are recyclable, but because of the way the packaging is manufactured, you can't separate them, and it's not recyclable. So in a Pringles tube, the tube, you've got metal bottom, you've got cardboard and plastic in the tube, and hard plastic lid. Now the lid's okay, but the tube itself, all of them, all the materials are recyclable because of the way packaging is manufactured. You can't separate them. There isn't a process there that will do it. So manufacturers are needing to look at this, and they are starting to look at the use of composite materials. And when we come on to something called extended producer responsibility later, those people that put hard to recycle materials on the market will be asked to contribute more under that scheme. So it will cost them. And then hopefully that they'll find that cost prohibitive and look for alternatives which can be recycled.
Thank you, Matt. Does anyone else have any questions, or can we move on to the next slide? Okay.
Okay, so this is the waste hierarchy. It's used everywhere in the world, really, about how to manage our waste. So number one is prevention. If you don't need something, don't use it, don't buy it, and then that's fine. That prevents waste. That's the best thing that you can do for responsible waste management. The second best thing that you could do is to reuse it. So use it in its current form. So the classic example for this one that I'll probably quote is the old glass milk bottles that you used to get from the milkman, leave them at your door, left them out the next day. They were sterilised and filled and reused again. So that's the second best thing. The third best thing that we can do with materials is recycling. So treating that material, creating a new substance or product, and making use of it. That's the third best thing, and probably where most of our focus is as a collection authority. The fourth best thing you can do is other recovery. So this is anaerobic digestion. It's something that we do with food waste that generates energy, and a soil fertilizer, or incineration, energy recovery. And then the worst thing that we can do with our waste is to landfill or incinerate it without any energy recovery. So that's what we're trying to do. And the more things we do at the top of that list, the better, really. The better for the environment, and the lower our carbon footprint. The more we do at the bottom, the worse it is. Regarding residual waste, probably should say that about 70% of the waste collected, residual waste collected in Leicestershire, goes to an incinerator with energy recovery and heat recovery as well. It's a combined, what's called a combined heat and power incinerator. So that creates energy for the grid, and it also contributes towards a district heating scheme there, and that's the best treatment that you can probably get for residual waste. Okay, if there's not any questions, I'll move on.
I have a question, Matt.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to ask on that last point, do we get any revenue from that 70% of waste that goes to incineration?
No, no. All of the costs for disposal and treatment are met by the county council, and even though we're providing materials through recycling or through for energy recovery, so fuel for a furnace in the case of residual waste, there's a cost. There's a cost. So I don't know what the county council pays for residual waste. I would guess that for every tonne we take to the incinerator, it would cost, I am guessing, I would say it cost in the region of about £120 per tonne for every tonne that we take.
Okay, thank you. The other thing I wanted to say was that looking at this waste hierarchy, it's obvious that the ideal is prevention or reuse, but actually we're being expected to increase our recycling percentages, which isn't environmentally the best option, because the best option would be prevention or reuse. So it does make it difficult for us as a waste collection authority, because really we want to be reducing the amount that goes into recycling because it doesn't get into that cycle in the first place.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped on one there. Absolutely, and our obligations as a local council around waste collection and the legislation that we have to adhere to all focuses on recycling and waste collection. So item 3, we haven't got any legal obligations to do 1 and 2, and it's not really clear what our role is, but I agree. I think we measure the wrong things. Nationally, I think we measure the wrong things. I think we should be measuring how much waste each household produces. And you could have a household that produces very little waste but recycles very little, compared to someone that consumes loads and loads of waste but recycles a lot. And the way that the performance indicators measure that, the household that consumes a lot would be seen as doing better than the household that doesn't have a lot of waste at all. So it is quite strange.
It does seem the wrong way to be assessing it, doesn't it? And I understand that whilst we don't explicitly have a responsibility to encouraging residents to prevent or reuse things, and it won't help our recycling percentages if we do, I do think in the greater scheme of things, it is something that we should be looking at as part of this panel, and it is in fact included in the scoping document.
Okay, if everyone's happy with that, I'll move on. So our target, we talked about targets before. So the 50% target was set by the EU Waste Framework Directive 2008, and that was a target that we were obligated to hit by 2020. It didn't happen. We've left the EU. I'm not sure there are any penalties for anybody, but I think that's gone. And what we do have is a new target that's going to be set by the Environment Bill. So the target is 65% of household waste by 2035, and a maximum of 10% of municipal waste going to landfill within the same time frame. So it's a collective target. It's not a target that's going to be assessed on a local level. We do keep our own local data, but that 65% is a target for the country, and I'm not sure it's going to be aggregated down to local authority level. But we will be expected to play our part in achieving that. So as far as I'm concerned, we'll be adopting that as a long-term target for our recycling going forward.
Matt, can you remind us what our current municipal waste is, what percentage that is of the overall waste collected?
So our recycling rate at the moment is about 43%. So we're looking at over a 20% increase. So that's a fundamental shift. But we have had fundamental shifts before. I think people need to remember that we started with one bin and everything went in it. And we got to, 20, 30, 40%, close to 50% quite quickly. When I say quite quickly, over 10 or 15 years, probably. I think we need another step change to get there, but we've already had one big leap. So this we'll start talking about nitty gritty now and things that will influence what we do in the borough. And the first one is the deposit return scheme. So a lot of the packaging that we collect or is disposed of through our street litter bins is plastic bottles and coffee containers, coffee drinks. So you'll see that 14 billion plastic bottles, 9 billion cans and 5 billion glass bottles a year are reported, and we recycle 70% of those. So the idea of a deposit return scheme is every time that you get a drinks receptacle, for each receptacle you pay a 20 pence deposit when you purchase it through the retail chain, and then that is redeemed through a reverse vending machine once you've finished with that container. So I'll move on to the next slide. There's some debate at the moment as to whether that includes products that are designed to be consumed on the go. So a single drink that you purchase in a shop while you're walking around doing your shopping in town, or whether it's going to apply to multi-pack containers that you might buy in the supermarket or have delivered to your home with your shopping. So there's some debate on whether that will happen. It's not clear at the moment how this is going to be factored in to our performance and how that material is going to be, the loss of that material is going to be made up. So if everyone who currently puts their drinks receptacles in their wheelie bin when they're finished, if they're then obliged to take it to a car park or a shopping retail shop and get 20p back on each container, that's taking some of the material out of our recycling stream, and obviously our tonnages will go down. So we're not sure how that's going to work. Some of that material might be quite valuable, and the county council might have to take a hit on losing that material. So particularly aluminium cans. Aluminium is recycled. Cans for recycling are fetching about £1,000 a tonne at the moment. So if that gets removed from our waste stream and goes into another one, how does that impact on the costs of managing our waste? I think this is quite a good proposal, personally. I think it will make, I hope that it will help people understand the value of the packaging that they have, that it does have a value, and that they can redeem that value when they reverse vend it. There are a few issues that we might face. We might get people looking through bins for containers in order to vend them and get some money. But there is a possibility of reduced litter. People might think twice about chucking their plastic bottle on the floor if they think they can get 20 pence back for it at the shop that they purchased it from. So, any questions on that one?
Matt?
Yeah.
I know there are concerns about the potential loss of valuable materials from the household recycling scheme, and that it would also impact on our recycling figures. But haven't the government also sort of promised burden funding for these schemes? So for the introduction of, and for any initial loss of revenue caused by the introduction of the scheme, does it cover loss of revenue as well, or is it just for the introduction of the schemes?
I don't think the new burden funding covers the loss of revenue from this proposal, Councillor Ward. If I'm honest, I'm happy to look into that further.
I think that's something we do need to know.
It is. It doesn't actually impact us directly, other than the fact that we might collect less material on our recycling rounds. The costs of losing that value material in the recycling stream, that's a risk for the county council, really, because we don't get any value from that anyway. But it is an important point. I don't think this will be covered by the new burden funding for local authorities.
Okay, I mean, I think it's a great idea, but it probably will have a negative impact on our recycling rates. But you know, if it's being recycled somewhere else, I can make my peace with that.
Yeah, I think I can as well. So, are there any questions on the deposit return scheme? Okay. Extended producer responsibility. Right, this is quite an interesting one. So the principle here is that anyone producing packaging has to pay the full net cost of managing their packaging till the end of its life. So manufacturers, retailers will have to pay for each bit of packaging that they produce. And then the money that's generated through that will be paid to waste collectors, including ourselves, to cover the cost of collection, transport, sorting, treatment. There'll be an element for litter on there, the stuff that we're picking in litter. And there will be an element of comms that could be paid for by that. So this could be a significant source of additional funding for us. Actually, if we're collecting the packaging that these manufacturers put on the market and then they're charged for its collection, most of our recycling, I would say, is packaging. This could be a source of revenue that we could use to offset some of the increased costs that we've got coming in some of the other proposals that we'll talk about later. So it's proposed under the scheme as well that some of the hard to recycle materials there's an additional levy on those. So a single material item of packaging, like a cardboard box, would be charged less than a composite material that we talked about earlier on. But there's still a lot of uncertainty there, but it works on the principle that the polluter pays, and the person or the organisation that puts the packaging on the market has to pay for that to be collected, treated, recycled, or whatever we do with it. And any questions on that? Not a lot of detail around this one at the moment, unfortunately. So I've got no idea how much that would mean for Charnwood, but it could be quite significant, I think, in terms of funding.
Is that likely to be a fixed sum per year or a one-off payment, or is it going to depend on the amount of what types of packaging are sold in Charnwood? I mean, how on earth are they going to determine that?
I think it will be based on what we collect as recycling and what the composition of that recycling is that we collect. So yeah, it's not clear at the moment, Councillor Ward, how it's going to work, but I think our payment will be based on what we collect and what's comprised within that mix of what we collect. Okay, we talked about this.
Sorry, Matt, I think Councillor Forrest would like to ask something.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think this is fascinating what Matt is telling us, particularly the polluter pays. But can I ask, I mean, Matt may not know at present, but is the technology there to count, record the kind of items that are going to be collected and then dealt with? So we collect a green bin, but how are we going to know what kind of material is in there? If it's a composite plastic or as if it's a cardboard box?
The information is already there.
Yeah.
So all of our commingled waste goes to a recycling facility in Leicester, and they do regular sample checks. They take a significant portion of that load and actually separate it out into different recyclable material. It's weighed, and then those figures are extrapolated for the whole of our recycling, and that process is repeated quite frequently. So I already get information around the tonnages that we get in and the composition of that recycling that goes into that plant. So we do have that now.
So the system is there and working?
Yes.
And can be expanded if necessary?
Yes.
Thank you.
The question that I would ask Councillor Forrest is at the other end of the process, and is how we know what manufacturers, what packaging they're producing,
yes,
how much and how they account for that. And I'm not sure about that because I'm not involved, but we know exactly. We don't count every load, but we have got a good sampling methodology that we use so we understand the composition of our recycling. Definitely, that's been in place for quite a long time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howe has his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. It's sort of on this principle, but have we done? We know. I mean, I've been to Caseback and seen it done. I'd recommend anyone on the committee who hasn't been to go there just to see how the waste is handled. It's quite eye-opening. And of course, we know the analysis of what is going in there, but has anyone done any analysis on what is going in the other direction as to how much recyclable materials are going into landfill and not going to Caseback? I mean, we've got to increase from 43% to 65%, which is a 50% increase. It's 20% on a scale, but it means we've got to increase the recyclable out by 50%, because it's not a 20% increase; it's a 50%. And as I say, I mean, has anyone actually sort of analysed everything that goes through all the bins and worked out that there is enough recyclable stuff in there to actually hit those targets? I mean, is there any evidence, for example, say that with the green bin, if people are getting a lot of stuff posted to them over this current crisis, that people aren't getting the green bin full, and to avoid waiting, are using the black bin?
Yeah.
And also there was the other point. I know it's not quite on there, but sometime this evening we need to discuss the percentage of sport waste as well, don't we? Because that was something we covered in the last one as well. That has an impact. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah. The short answer to that is yes, we do, but the data isn't anywhere near as reliable because we don't monitor it as frequently. So the reason that we have the data for the recycling facility is that it's heavily regulated by DEFRA, and it's a requirement on them by them on the recycling facility to produce that data. There are no similar requirements on us to do the same for residual waste, but we do undertake composition analysis periodically, every few years. When I say periodically, where we take a wagon full of residual waste and someone goes through it to see what's in there. And probably about 30 or 40% by weight is food. And that's the highest fragment, probably. That's the highest single component of what's in a residual waste bin. Normally, you've got other things. You do get recycling in there, quite small amounts. Very small amounts of garden waste. It's said to be quite often that because we've got a chargeable garden waste service, that people put it in the black bin. That it's not borne out by the analysis at all. You know, and then you've got nappies and other hygiene products in there, animal waste, that sort of thing. But it is done. We have got some data on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I don't think there are any other questions, so feel free to move on.
Okay, this is an interesting proposal by the government, and we talked earlier when we looked at performance about commingled waste and how the authorities that commingle their waste, when I say commingle, everything goes in one bin, how their performance compared to the authority that ask residents to separate their waste. The government its preferred method of recycling collection is to separate the recycling within the waste and resources strategy. And the reason for that is that you get tiny fragments of glass in the cardboard and paper recycling, paper and cardboard recycling mills, and that causes them a problem. And that's the reason. So the government is saying it's a quality issue, so they would prefer us to either split the waste into 2 containers or even 3. There is an exemption in this, in that they're saying that if you can prove that it's not technically, environmentally, or economically practicable to do that, then you can carry on mixing your waste in the way that we do at the moment. So essentially, we'd have to go through a process to prove that we could secure what's known as a TEEP exemption. So that it, again, I would say it's technically, environmentally, economically practicable. It's not practicable to separate it. We can carry on commingling. So my view is that the more complicated you make it for residents, the less take up that you get and the less recycling that you get at the other end of the process. The counter argument that you get back in the industry is that the recyclables that you collect are cleaner, less contamination, higher quality, get more money for it. So there's a lot of debate about this, whether it's a good thing or not really. So I think I can see a hand up there with a question.
Yes, Councillor Parton.
The sort of the thick of it, or the yes prime minister scenario, because you can get one expert that says, well, you know, there's this paper come out and they've said that this is the best way to do it. Well, you've obviously asked the wrong expert. This expert says this is the best way to do it. So it does seem here that there's a bit of a two sides both giving expert advice. Which one do you think will win?
I'm not sure really. Councillor Partner. I think really there are 2 paper mills in the UK, to my knowledge. There are 2 big paper processing mills. And the question I would ask is, are we going to change the way that hundreds of local authorities collect their waste at the request of 2 paper mills that could introduce some technology to their plant to solve this problem? And I guess that's the question that I would be asking. The reason I would say that is that the way that we currently collect waste in co-mingling is by far the most resource efficient way of doing it in terms of the operatives that we use. So you can empty more bins per hour and you need fewer people by co-mingling. If you're separating waste and the operative has to put it in different compartments on the vehicle, then it's much less efficient. You take more time at each property and it costs a lot more to collect it. So there's a trade-off between cheaper collection costs but slightly lower quality material, or less high quality material with higher collection costs. So there's a lot to factor into this one.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Forrest had her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I am quite fascinated by this because I was on the council about 1 million years ago when we first introduced recycling. And this was the method we used. We separated almost everything. We separated paper and card, we separated glass, and we also separated materials. We had the green box with the lid on that you could put material inside. I understand about more expensive collection methods, but more complicated collection for residents. I don't think that was the case back then, and I don't think it would be the case if we reintroduced that. Residents understood what they were being asked to do and did it. Although, as far as separating glass was concerned, we had actually many more bring sites then where they had the bottle banks that could be utilised. Manual handling issues for residents and operatives. I don't know about operatives, but I think any issues for residents would be overcome. And I think that we would regain the benefits of higher quality recycling. But of course, there would be the cost that I don't think we could afford another fleet of lorries to do it. But I'm intrigued by the idea that we would be looking at a method that was used and then discarded. We would put everything into the green bin, and now we're looking at going back to what I actually thought was a better method, because it was all separated at source, if you like, and I think it was a better system. But I would be fascinated to see how it would work out again. Thank you for that, Matt.
Thank you, Councillor Forrest. Yeah, okay. I have some scepticism about introducing separate waste collection streams for all of these items. I know it's what we did in the past, because it's what we did in my house when I was younger. Would there be some burden funding to councils for introducing separate waste streams?
I don't think they would, Councillor Ward. I think the new burdens funding is focusing on the food waste and garden waste that we're going to talk about in a moment.
So we're likely to shoulder the cost of introducing new receptacles, new fleet vehicles, all of possibly training for operatives. We're going to incur all of those costs.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Needham has her hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, just to come on exactly what you were saying just there. I mean, have we got any kind of ballpark figure on the amount that that would cost us? It has to be running into millions, surely, to replace all those receptacles and have new fleets. It must be astronomical. Surely that in itself is an economic exemption.
I would think so, Councillor Needham. I don't have any costs for that. I mean, you've got to think, to start with, you'd probably need to dispose of nearly 80,000 wheelie bins that we've got in circulation at the moment for the collection of that waste. And we are then generating that waste. We're putting that waste out there, and they're not going to be reused. They're probably going to be recycled, which is the third best thing to do, not the first best thing. And then there are two ways to do it. So you can have what's called a twin stream, where you collect your paper and your card separately for everything else. And you have two receptacles. Some councils actually have something that sits in the, you could actually keep the wheelie bin and they have a thing that sits in the top that collects the paper and card. Or a multi-stream, where you'd have probably 3 different receptacles to collect things. So one would have glass, one would have paper and card, and the other would have mixed plastic and metal. And that would need to go for sorting. So it depends on what you do and to how many containers you need and everything else. I think the harder we make it for people, the less people are likely to do it, is my personal view. Our system, if you can get past if you understand what can go in the bin and what can't, our system is quite easy. It's not very labour intensive, doesn't need any effort whatsoever. But that's a personal view, and someone in my position from another authority would make a counter argument the other way. We should do it differently. So there we go.
Thank you. I think of all there's sort of alternative methods proposed about separating out the waste streams, probably the twin stream option is the one that you've just been talking about, with potentially putting a receptacle inside the existing bin to separate it out, would be the least expensive and the least confusing for residents. So let's hope that that's the sensible option that's settled upon. Can I just ask, Matt, when is it likely that this environment bill is going to achieve royal assent? Do we know? Is it still on track to happen this year, or?
I think the bill will get royal assent this year. I think there was a push to try and to get it done while COP26 was on, to be honest, to tie it in. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. Some of these things will require secondary legislation. So the Environment Bill gives the power to the government to do certain things, and then the way that happens is set out in secondary legislation. So some of it will require secondary legislation. I went to a conference last month with the director of DEFRA, and I was hoping to get some answers there about timescales for these things. The original timescales were 2023 or 2024. I am anticipating that they get pushed back a little bit, maybe it's 2025, but that's an assumption on my part, and you should not take that for granted. But I think some of the proposals, if we're talking about everyone buying containers, some people will need new vehicles, will need new anaerobic digesters for food waste and the treatment facilities. The prospect of that being available for people in the numbers that we need it to be by 2023, I think is unrealistic from where we are now.
Okay, thank you.
So if we move on. Okay, so the government is going to mandate that we collect a core set of materials, and that will apply to every local authority. Not a big deal for us really, because we already collect all of the materials that the government is suggesting that we collect. So not a problem there. So I suggest that that's not one to worry about.
Well, it is and it isn't, because the fact that we already collect all those materials is great, but again, that makes us achieving that target more difficult, because some authorities won't already be collecting all of those things, will introduce those things to their recycling lists and will automatically increase their percentage of recycling, one would assume, whereas we're not going to be in that position.
No, it's a good point, really. Yeah, so we are already collecting all of those things, and you're right. If we can't add anything into the mix, then how are we going to achieve that? I mean, there are things that we could add on, but we don't have to. So recently, we had to suspend our battery collections because of health and safety issues, and we don't collect textiles. We don't collect small electrical items with the recycling. There are things that we can do, but they're not on the core set of materials that are stipulated by the government. So we have got some scope, but not a huge amount.
So if we introduce those additional schemes like textile recycling, reintroduce battery collections, small electrical recycling, and any of the sort of more specialist items that can be recycled, toothbrushes, crisp packets, all the rest of it, would all of that count to our recycling figures?
It's recycled, yeah, yes.
It doesn't matter that they're not on that core list of recyclable items?
No.
Okay.
No, it's a minimum, and we can take it beyond that. And if those materials are recycled, then that's
okay. So it's something that's going to be worth looking at for us. Then is looking at the potential to recycle other things that we don't currently recycle.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, this is quite a big one for us, and I think this is where the proposals get more interesting. So there's a proposal for a weekly collection of food from 2023. That's as it's written at the moment. I expect that date will change, to be honest, and I think it will say 2024 or 2025. But weekly collection of food, 51% local authorities in England collect food waste separately already, and as I said earlier, food waste accounts for about 30 or 40% by weight of the residual waste bin. So this is a big proportion of what goes in our black bin at the moment, and this is great. It's a great proposal, and it will certainly improve our performance, but our concerns are the cost, really. So an educated guess, really, of what it would cost in revenue for us is over £1 million a year to introduce this service. And obviously, we've got our budget pressures that we have already. Adding £1 million into the mix isn't ideal. And the reason I say it's around about £1 million, about 5 years ago, we went through a modelling exercise on the collection of food waste in Charnwood, and we did some quite detailed modelling there, and that suggested that if we dropped the residual waste collections, we dropped that to 3 weekly and collected food waste on a weekly basis, it would cost us another £715,000. That was quite detailed. Now, we're not suggesting that we collect residual waste 3 weekly on this proposal, so you've got no savings there to offset against that. So I think it would easily be £1 million really, to collect food waste a year. And then you've got the capital cost, and the capital costs for containers I would estimate to be between 1 and 1.4 million. And then there's uncertainty around the capacity of anaerobic digestion facilities, where they're located. There isn't any that could take all the food waste from Leicestershire in close proximity at the moment. But what the government have said is that they will ensure that local authorities are resourced to meet the new costs arising from the policy, including any upfront transition costs and ongoing operational costs. So this is the new burden funding that Councillor Ward was talking about earlier. The concern there is A, will it meet 100% of our costs, or will their offer of new burden funding be less? And B, how long is this new burden funding going to last for? Is it going to be merged with another funding source so that it's not transparent, and then it gets slowly reduced and removed over time, and we're left picking up the bill? So that is the concern on food waste collections. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Needham had her hand up, and then Councillor Howe.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, Matt just answered the question I was going to ask at the end there, basically saying about, do we know if it's going to match our actual costs and how long is it going to last for, and the operational costs. The other thing that I suppose it's not really a question, just something that I'm just thinking that's slightly concerning to me is about there's obviously in that hierarchy that we saw earlier about the prevention coming first type thing. A little bit of me is worried about this, about how much it actually legitimizes food waste, when I think there's been quite a lot of good work over the last few years where people have reduced it and realized how important that is. So yeah, it's just more of a thought really than anything, that I would be a little bit nervous about whether people might change their habits back to slightly worse ways if this comes in.
Can I come in there, Councillor?
Yeah, Matt, I know you have some experience of working in councils where there has been food waste collections.
Yeah, I worked at a council. I worked at Harborough District Council before I came to Charnwood. We had a food waste collection system. We were quite an early adopter of that, and the additional figures of what we collected were quite encouraging. We didn't quite hit the anticipated tonnage that we thought we'd collect. It was quite encouraging, but we found that sort of dropped off over time, and we ended up stopping doing that particular service because we were collecting less and less material each week. So there was a 14% set out rate. So 14% of residents were participating in that, in the collection. And one of the thoughts that we had around this was that rather than residents sort of legitimising food waste and giving them a way of getting rid of it easily every week, we believed that people saw what they were throwing away. And they actually changed their habits, and their food waste was reducing. So by separating it, it was obvious that they were buying too much food, and we felt that they stopped doing that, and they managed their shopping better, and they made more use of the food that they had. So yeah, my thoughts was it could go the other way rather than provided, generating more.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Thanks for that, Matt. I had never thought of it that way, but that does kind of make sense, and I'm quite pleased to hear that, actually. Thank you.
It is really interesting, and I think if and when we are obliged to introduce the food waste collections, I think it would be really interesting to run it along with sort of an information campaign for residents about reducing food waste, because yes, we've got the collections and yes, we have targets, but really the ultimate aim is prevention. So if by introducing the collections, we can sort of make residents more aware of what they are wasting and ways of reducing that, I think that's a positive thing. Councillor Howe, did you have a point to make?
Thank you. Yeah. With these digesting units, would they in theory be run by the county council, or would they be commercial? And are they sort of large units or small ones? Because one of my concerns about our waste is that we have to truck it such a long distance, to get rid of it. That a lot of our vehicles are going up and down on the road just to get to a site. And the other thing is, because if we're collecting 30 to 40% less, we need 30 to 40% less vehicles on paper. So can we convert the existing vehicles we've got for that, or would we have to dispose of some of those and buy some new ones? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Howard. Interesting questions, that really. What I did say was that the black bin does have 30 or 40% food waste in it. Getting 30 or 40% of that food waste out of that black bin and into a food caddy is very difficult. So you'll never get full compliance with the scheme. You will get some reductions in tonnages on that, but whether it's significant enough to drop one vehicle from around, I'm not sure.
Yep.
And we've also need to factor in that the borough's growing by about 1,000 houses a year. So it's not a static, the collections aren't static. We're bolting new roads on all the time to our collections. So I'd say there's quite a remote possibility of reducing the residual waste rounds, if I'm honest, if we brought food waste in.
Yeah.
The food waste would be collected on separate vehicles. So we'd need a new fleet of vehicles to do this. And then you're right, that the end destination, the AD plant, the anaerobic digester, might be some way away. The one, Northwest Leicestershire are doing a food waste trial at the moment. So they're trialling it in a limited number of households, and they're planning to roll it out quite soon to the rest of their borough. The AD plant that they're using, I believe, is in Atherstone, Warwickshire, which is probably about 6 miles the other way from Chandler, from where I live. So what we need really to make this work is we need some bulking capacity, or what's called a transfer station. So we would tip the food waste somewhere locally from our vehicles that collect from the house, and then it would be transported in larger trucks to the treatment centre where it's treated. But there is a capacity issue with AD plants, and I think it will need addressing if we're going to collect all this food waste.
Thank you.
Matt, can I ask, did Charnwood submit responses to the consultation on this?
We did. I did that in consultation with Councillor Harper Davis as the lead member.
So what kind of, did you offer that kind of feedback as part of your response to the consultation about what we would need in order to make it work? Yeah,
the responses were, a lot of the responses were yes, no, or closed questions, not free text. We did put some free text in. I'm happy to share the responses with the panel, and we can discuss those.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
But our responses were based primarily on our concerns around the cost of doing this and our inability as a council to fund these things if the funding didn't fully cover the costs for the long term. So I think from memory, I think we said on this one that we probably weren't supportive on this suggestion. The reason that the government want us to stop, want us to start collecting food waste is because it generates methane when it's landfilled. That's a greenhouse gas, obviously, it's bad for the environment, and that's quite it's quite a good aim. But the waste in Leicestershire, most of it is incinerated. So that methane that would have been generated is lost through the incineration process. So I'm not sure that the way things work in our energy from waste plant really is I don't think the food waste being there is detrimental to the environment. Whereas if it was going to landfill, it would be producing methane all the time, contributing to global warming. So, yeah, but I'm quite happy to share that with you when I.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that's food waste. Just a bit more on that, just to show you, say how it works really, is you have a kitchen caddy that sits on your kitchen, quite a small caddy, and then a larger caddy that sits outside, and you decant the food waste from the kitchen caddy into the larger caddy that you present to the crew on a weekly basis. Another big proposal for us is the proposal that we collect garden waste from every household on a free of charge basis on fortnightly. So there's a bit of uncertainty around the level of financial support for this. So I've estimated that we'd lose income from subscribers that we have at the moment to the service. Obviously, it's a paid service at the moment. We currently generate about £1.4 million a year through our subscriber service. Our contract costs, I estimate, would increase by about £650,000 a year if we had to collect from every household. And we'd have to buy around 35,000 wheelie bins at a cost of about £30 each delivered, which is about £1 million. So again, the government are saying that they would treat this as a new burden and would contribute to our costs for this in a similar way to the food waste. But what they haven't been clear about is whether they would contribute to our lost revenue. So obviously we've got the costs listed there. I'm not sure that they would be willing to offset the income that we currently receive from charging people for this service. In fact, if I was a council that was providing this service free of charge, and have done that for residents, and that's quite a good thing for them to do, and then the government stipulated that we had to do this, and the government subsidised the councils that had to charge for the service, then that seems a little bit out of kilter to me. But that's potentially got some big costs for us there, or losses in revenue that we've got. Any questions on free garden waste collection?
Can't see any, Matt.
I think
I've just got a point with the. I would say that the prohibitive cost of doing this across the country falling. Where would the cost fall? It would most likely be that local authorities would be asked to make up the shortfall, which they're just totally incapable of not being able to do, whether it's a district or a unitary authority. So I really can't see. I'm highly doubtful as to whether this would even get anywhere near to fruition, thankfully.
The district councils network are lobbying quite hard with the government to reconsider this proposal. But as it's presented in the latest consultation, it would be a free service for all residents with a garden. So unless there's a change in that's the latest position from the government. I would say.
It is, yeah, it does make you wonder, doesn't it?
No, it's absolutely staggering. Extremely quickly with my county council, the prohibitive costs of adult social care in children's, to think that then councils would also have to take this, which in the grand scheme of things is lower down the hierarchy of importance. Understanding the others I've just aforementioned, I would find this highly unlikely.
Yeah, just to say, I'll come on to this in a minute, Councillor Parton, but because treatment of residual waste is the most expensive, and the treatment of food waste and garden waste and recycling is a lot cheaper, the county council would save money the more our performance improved. So these costs would be borne by the borough council for the food waste and the garden waste, but the county council would make a saving by virtue of the fact that we were putting less waste in the black bin.
So it's not actually a case of choosing between those services that you've just mentioned, Ted, because it's not a cost the county are going to bear. It just means that one of the sort of few sources of revenue that we currently have that we use to offset other costs is going to disappear, and we're not going to be able to replace it with anything. So it does make you wonder whether central government really understands the financial burdens that local authorities are facing at the moment.
I'll have to look into this with the LGA.
Councillor Howe, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to say, because I mean, at the moment, presumably there's quite a few people who haven't got the bin because they don't want to pay for it. And then every month or 2 months or 3 months, they go down to Mount Sorrel or Loughborough or something and get rid of their garden waste. Whereas if there's a free bin, they're going to do that. So that's going to further cut the amount that the county council, I mean, we'll be ending up delivering the waste to the county council instead of the public doing it, won't we? So, and I mean, we've got to check all the bins then. You know, they most probably won't get full up. So, yes, I don't fancy this idea at all. Thank you.
It's quite a worrying one when you look at the financial impacts. When you add the proposals together and work out what it could cost us, it really is quite difficult to see how we can afford it if the funding doesn't come through.
Yeah, apparently Councillor Harper-Davies has just mentioned that our MP is possibly on a waste management panel at government, so it might be worth speaking to her about how this is shaping up.
Yeah, it's certainly a good suggestion, and I think that representations have already been made to MP on this, and we've made our views known as a borough council. So
Okay,
it'll be
that's good
interesting
to
to
know.
see how that goes forward, really. Okay, I'll move on. I think that's all the proposals in the Environment Bill that I wanted to talk about tonight. We've been at it for quite a while. The Environment Bill and the waste and recycling strategy is very detailed, and I haven't covered all of it tonight, but I tried to focus on the things that I think are most important to us, have the biggest impact on us. Just wanted to say, to sort of emphasise the point that I made earlier to Councillor Parton, is there are financial benefits to recycling more. But because the way that our responsibilities are split, the benefits aren't necessarily shared. And one party ends up with the cost of doing a lot of these things, and another party ends up with the benefits. So, as I say, we're the Waste Collection Authority. Our duty is to collect the waste from the households and deliver it to the treatment point that the county council tell us to take it to. And it's their responsibility to treat it either by incinerating it as residual waste or recycling it. So I came up with a bit of a scenario that I thought members of the panel might find interesting. So, you know, we talked about food waste. We introduce a weekly food waste collection, costs 1 million per annum. That could be offset by the government. We managed to collect 50% of the estimated food waste in the back bin, so 4,800 tonnes. I've estimated the cost of disposal of food waste at £20 per tonne, and the cost of disposal for residual waste at £105 a tonne. So there's a differential in treatment costs of £85 a tonne. The county council would make a saving of £408,000 on their treatment costs. So I think really what I'm highlighting is that between there are winners and losers in two-tier authority areas in terms of funding and finance, and how the benefits of success where they're seen. I just thought I'd highlight that really to you and make you aware of that. Any questions on any of those things?
I can't see anybody with their hand up. I just wanted to suggest, I don't know how many slides you've got left, Matt.
I've finished there.
Okay.
Ward. I know we've been going for a while. I apologise.
Yeah, we have. No, I just wanted to say, if we're sort of towards the end of your presentation, it might be an idea, going back to what we were just saying about our MP and representations having been made to her, and if she does sit on a waste panel, it might be worth inviting her to one of our future meetings, and we can put those questions to her directly about what's happening with the food waste collections, see if she can find any answers for us to any of those questions that we had about what costs would be met, what costs won't be met. What do members of the panel think? Councillor Forrest?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's an excellent idea. And if you need to have a formal proposal, I will be very happy to propose that we invite our MP Jane Hunt to come to one of our meetings to be arranged to discuss the matters that you have just outlined.
Thank you, Councillor Forrest. Councillor Parton?
Yeah, having looked at the LGA website, the representations that they've made to government are quite forthright in that they want this idea halted. However, they said at the very least, if the government is to proceed, it should fully fund it in the spending review. But I've not looked at the spending review, but they are vehemently against it, the LGA. So I think the government are in no doubt that what the LGA or collective body think.
Okay, I presume that they're against the idea based on the costs that it's going to incur for.
They're also talking about CO2 emissions from the extra lorries.
Okay.
Councillor Ward, I've made a proposal. We need a seconder to move it forward.
Yes, you have, Councillor Forrest. Laura, do we need to make a formal proposal?
Not really, Chair. If the panel by sort of mutual consent are all happy with that proposal to invite Jane Hunt to a future meeting, then I think that's acceptable in this setting.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody that objects to that idea? No. Okay, well, perhaps we can talk about which meeting it would be appropriate to invite her to. Thank you. Okay, so Matt, do you have anything else to add on this item?
No, not at this stage.
Councillor Parton, your hand is still up. Do you have something else you wish to say?
Only that it's an old hand, apologies.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of confirming the outcomes of this section of the meeting, we've agreed to look at inviting our MP to a future meeting. Is there anything else that anyone would like to recommend as an outcome of this section of the meeting? I think at some point Councillor Howe was talking about the waste treatment facility, and that it would be a good idea if members on the panel who haven't visited. I know some, like Councillor Howe, were on the previous iteration of this panel and did do that. Are there any members that didn't and would like to go? Councillor Forrest, Councillor Baldwin.
Yes, I'd love to go, please.
Okay, Laura, could we make that another outcome of this section of the meeting then? I think it would be good if we could arrange for members to go and have a look around the plant. Thank you. Okay, if we don't have any other, Councillor Howe, sorry, I missed your hand.
No, that's no problem. Could I ask, would it be possible then to do, it was mentioned that in the past we've done analysis of loads, not the loads going to case pack, but the loads going to the tip. If I don't know what the costs are or how difficult it is, but it would give us a sort of ballpark idea of the current situation if we had an analysis of a load now to see how much recyclable waste is going to landfill. That's one point. The second point that came up, I think at a subsequent meeting, we should consider, we've got the ranges from publicity to encourage people to do waste. But at the end of the day, I have heard, you know, where sanctions have been involved, where, you know, people have had stickers on their bins saying that there's waste in. So I think we ought to, one thing we can do to influence the waste is by publicity and possibly by sanctions. I don't know whether local authorities do that and whether that's been successful, but there was that point as well, and that covers me then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Matt, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, certainly. The composition analysis study on residual waste is very, very expensive. What we can do is to share the results of the previous ones that we've done, rather than commission a new one. And
okay,
I think,
when was the last one carried out? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think it's a while ago, probably 2 years ago, I think.
Well, 2 years is not so bad. I mean,
no,
I doubt things are going to have changed significantly. I mean, there's obviously been a bit of a blip in the middle as well because there's been the pandemic, so that wouldn't have offered representative data anyway.
I think the information would be good enough for the purposes that we need them for, Councillor Ward. It gives an indication of what is going in the black bin.
Perhaps we could obtain that information and circulate it to members of the panel so that we have it for the next meeting. And what was your second point, Councillor Howe?
Just to unmute myself, I say we ought to consider publicity locally to encourage people to do it. It's one of the few things we can influence in, you know, as we're halfway down. But on top of publicity, as I say, I know that attempts have been made to sort of sanction people constantly leaving stuff. And I just wondered if there was any evidence from anywhere, other local authorities that have done it or something, whether that's effective or not. I wouldn't know where to start myself. But,
so we're looking at publicity and sort of carrot and stick initiatives.
Can I come in there, Councillor Ward? We used to be able to issue fixed penalty notices under the Environmental Protection Act for a variety of things, including not recycling the right things, leaving the lid up on bin by overfilling it, and things like that. We didn't do it in an overzealous way. Some of the local authorities did, and those penalties, fixed penalty notices, the right to do that was revoked a number of years ago. So we can't impose sanctions on people for not following our advice. We'd obviously try to educate people in the first instance to increase their awareness. But if there's a compliance issue that's ongoing, we can't issue fixed penalty notices under the Environmental Protection Act any longer. The sanction for someone that contaminates their recycling bin is that if we're aware of it, we don't collect it. So the operatives look in the bin. If there's non-recyclable items in there, they leave it full and put a ticket on it to say that it's contaminated, and we would expect the resident to put it right before we collect it. So, but comms is a really good point. It's something that we've got a lot of influence on. We've got a lot of reach. It's quite cheap with social media nowadays. I know not everybody's on social media or the internet, but you can get some quite good coverage. And there's a lot of information around there about nudge theories and trying to motivate people to do the right thing with regard to recycling. So that's something that I think is worth exploring.
I think it is too, especially because I still don't think that residents realise the scope of items that they can recycle in Charnwood, because to be perfectly honest, I wasn't aware until I participated in a street stall with some of our officers that, for example, the plastic film on sort of ready meal trays is recyclable, and there aren't many authorities, I don't think, in the country where that kind of plastic and bread bags and carrier bags can all be put in the recycling bin. And I don't think that many residents are aware of that. So I do think some more sort of media campaign around that would maybe bump up our rates a little bit. Councillor Needham.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly this actually. A big thing I've been thinking the whole way through this is that I really think a big part of this should be the comms on it, because I'm much more of a carrot than a stick person, and like Councillor Howe here, where I think actually if people are, I think we have a lot of negative messaging, particularly nationally, about the value of recycling sometimes. So I get a lot of, oh, well, you just put it all on a boat and ship it to another country where it goes to landfill anyway. And we know that that's not the case, that actually we saw at the beginning of the meeting, there's actually loads of positives here. And we're actually doing loads of really good stuff. So I think maybe at a future meeting, we could talk about how we kind of communicate that to our residents and say, actually, you are doing a really good job and we can do better, we can do more, and kind of raise the profile in a much more positive way, because I think those negative things that come through actually sometimes discourage people. They think, oh, I can't be bothered to rinse out this tin because it's just going to go to landfill somewhere else anyway. We've got to tell them that there's a different story to it. So yeah, I'd love to think about how we communicate this more to change residents' behaviour, which is, we already know, quite good, but you know, how can it be better?
Yeah, I totally agree. Really
good. Competitions as well, Chair, if we could say competitions.
Yeah,
is a good one.
I think we may have slightly crossed over into the scope of item 8 on the agenda, which is sort of key task planning for future meetings, because some of the, I don't think it really matters because I'm sure Laura was noting everything down anyway. But yeah, I think some of the sort of later comments relate to things that will go into our key task planning. But going back to the scoping document, having a look at the key tasks. So this evening we've gone through the breakdown and analysis of our waste and recycling data. Matt has benchmarked against other authorities. I think some of the remaining things on that key task list are identifying barriers and looking at ways to overcome them. And I would suggest that comms is one of those things around what can we recycle, because I think that might be one of the barriers, is not knowing what we can recycle. Investigate new research technology and methods that could help improve our recycling rates. We've established that we already recycle all of the items on the core sort of materials list. So we are going to have to look at other ways of increasing the rates, be that technology or introducing different items that we don't currently recycle. So I would like to see that as one of the tasks at the next meeting, maybe.
Can I suggest something, Councillor Ward?
Yes, please do.
As well. The new Leicestershire waste strategy that we're producing at the moment is going for public consultation in January, and we are modelling some high-level modelling of the performance and carbon impact of around 9 different recycling regimes. In that, different arrangements, cost, performance, carbon footprint, basically, the 3 key outputs there. One of the things that is suggested on there is reducing residual waste capacity for residents. So the theory is that if you're doing more recycling and you're collecting food waste, that you don't need as much space in your bin, or your bin needs collecting less frequently. So that will be one of the options that's modelling. So I think that a sort of a look into that might be worthwhile. So, you know, what would be the impact in the borough if we changed everybody's black bin to a smaller one? Because that then, the comms is the carrot, the stick that a lot of councils are using at the moment, is by giving people only the capacity that they need for residual waste to force their participation into recycling and food waste collection schemes. So the theory is, if you give people the capacity in their black bin, that they will use it. If you don't give them the capacity, they can't use it, and they have to do the other things that you put in place that are managing their waste better.
I suppose it's a little bit like, you know, the more loft space you've got, the more stuff you fit in it, but I think it's going to be a controversial one. So what are you saying, Matt? I know you want us to have a look at that strategy at a future meeting, but obviously that's not going to have been made public by the time of the next meeting. So
maybe not for the next one, Councillor Ward, but I think the one in January, I think we should consider all of the options that have been modelled, including the that would look at separating recycling or not, residual waste capacity, and all sorts of other things. And I think we should go through that in some detail.
Okay, so if we pencil in that at that January meeting that you can give us a presentation. Okay, Councillor Needham's just messaged that the next meeting after the December one is February, the beginning of February, by which time it will have been really made public, won't it?
Yeah.
So maybe at that meeting you could present that and we can have a look at it. Okay, the next meeting is on the 14th of December. So what does the panel want to look at that meeting?
Chair, can I just jump in there? So ideally, on top of anything else you might do, I'd look to complete another couple of your key tasks that are listed in that scope document. So I think you had already suggested that the, can't remember, the researching other, sorry, I'll have to have a look at it to remember which one it was you said. Yeah, investigate new research technology might be something you wanted to do at the December meeting. So I don't know if there are other, I would suggest at least 2 key tasks are ticked off at that meeting.
Okay, yeah, that's one that we could have a look at. Overview of proposals of the Environment Bill we've done this evening. So perhaps, Matt, could we ask you to have a look also at some of the other local authorities that are sort of leaders, and maybe have some conversations with them around the areas that they are sort of ahead of us on, and see if there's any sort of best practice that we can take away from that?
So certainly could have a conversation with the ones that are the top performers, definitely. And even if I can't get to speak to people, you can garner quite a lot of information from the website about their collections and how they're performed. And I can even get their tonnage data on their waste data and dig into why they're performing so well. Is it because they've got large gardens, or are they recycling really well? Things like that.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. So if for the next meeting on the 14th, we could ask you to have a look at that. And if we're going to have a look at research and technology, I'm just wondering who's going to take responsibility for that, or whether we want to ask members to go away and do a little bit of individual research, perhaps. We give everybody some homework.
Could you just expand, sorry, Chair, when you say research and technology? What specifically you'd like us to go away and look at? Because it may be that there's several strands, and it will be worth individual members, rather than crossing over, to be given a certain specific item to look at.
Perhaps that's something we can determine outside of the meeting, and have a look at sort of who we're going to allocate to which areas of research. Is that okay, Councillor Parton?
Approximately how many are we talking about here?
Until we have a look at it, I couldn't say. I think this is something we'll have to sort of communicate with members via email about once we've had a look into it. Okay. So if we put those as two of the tasks for the next meeting, and Laura, do you think it's too short notice to try and organise a visit to Case Pack between now and the 14th of December?
Matt would probably know a bit more about how easy it is to get through the door there, but we don't know if you need to book it months in advance like a good restaurant, Matt, or...
Yeah, I'll speak to the county on that one, Councillor Ward. We don't have the contract with Case Pack, so we have to ask the county council to facilitate that for us. So I'll have a conversation. And,
okay, if you could start looking into that, that would be good. Thank you. Okay, so I think that sums up what we've determined as outcomes for this meeting. Can I ask members of the panel to confirm that they're happy with the tasks that we've identified for the next two meetings? Councillor Parton?
Sorry, there's an incident going on outside, so it's been going on all evening. There's an HMO across the road, and there's something going on. So you're saying that you're going to provide us with these technological topics, and then we're going to decide between ourselves which ones we'll look at. And will we have to send them to Laura a week before, so they can be presented and we can all read them?
Probably, Councillor Parton. I think this is something that we can determine. But yes, I'm sure we can share all of the research that we've individually done, and Laura can compile it for the next meeting. So just to clarify, for the next meeting, Matt is going to go away and do some research on best practice from other local councils, and individual members are going to be assigned an area of new technology or research into recycling methods to look at. And Matt is also going to contact the county about a visit to Caseback. So those are the 3 actions for the next meeting. Councillor Needham, are you happy with those?
That's fine.
Thank you. Councillor Howe?
Yes, yes. As I say, from the onset, it's difficult to get this thing moving. So yes, I'm quite happy with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Forrest?
Yes, I absolutely agree with everything we've said. I think it's been an excellent meeting. Thank you for chairing it so well. Thank you to the officers, and can we thank Matt as well for his excellent presentation. It's been an excellent evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forrest. I'm glad you've enjoyed it.
I don't often say that about council meetings, you know.
Councillor Baldwin, are you happy?
Yes, I'm happy, Chair.
Okay, that's good. Okay, yes, I echo Councillor Forrest's comments. Thank you, Matt, for those presentations and so capably answering all of our questions. It was a really informative session, and I think we've got something to go on for our next meeting. So at that point, I would ask the panel to note the further scheduled meetings as set out on the agenda, the next one being on the 14th of December. And at that point, I will close the meeting. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
I'll just ask Ed to confirm when the live stream's ended, councillors. Thank you.